Way back in 2013, Old School RuneScape was released. However, at the time, there was no grand exchange, so trying to find whatever item you wanted to buy was kind of a mess. You could subject yourself to the hundreds of spam messages you'd see in Varrock or Falador, but a little fan site called Zybez decided to instead create a market price database, where you could list your item, put a price, add your username, and a note, and that's it, you're done. Wait for someone to PM you and meet them in the area that they choose to sell your items. I remember spending literally hours chopping U-logs, posting them on the site, and making what I thought was a huge profit. However, that's not what this video is about. This video, we're going to travel all the way back to the early to mid 2000s, where once again RuneScape didn't have a grand exchange. We're going to take a look at just how much these items were buying and selling for back then, and what they're going for now. The differences in price in a few of these just might surprise you. So, as I mentioned earlier, Zybez used to have a page for old school players to buy and sell their items. The idea for this feature originates all the way back into 2002, when someone created a little thread called the General Price Guide. Although that original post seems to be lost to time, I did however find an updated version from 2003. It was posted to a website called Curve Space that has long since been abandoned. The newest topic was added in October of 2017, and the last shoutbox posting is from July of this year. I'm honestly shocked this website still exists, especially after looking around. I have no clue what it's actually for. Moving on, the site had its own RuneScape clan, and luckily for us, one of those clan members posted to the forums on November 5th, 2003 with this updated price guide. That is literally over 15 years ago now, and the fact that I can still find it without having to go through something like the Wayback Machine is just mind-blowing to me. Just looking at the prices of a lot of these is insane. Let's take a look at something like lobsters. Back in 2003, they were worth 1500 GP each. Now they're only worth around 220 GP. The price of lobsters in 2003 is even more than sharks go for today. Speaking of sharks, in 2003 they were anywhere from 4,000 to 5,000 GP. That's so crazy compared to today's prices, which is in the mid 800s. The same trend follows for items like logs and ores, but it's even more extreme with some of them. U-logs are literally 10 times the price they are now, 2,500 all the way down to about 250. As for ores and bars, however, they're all generally the same price they were way back then. Most just have a difference around a couple hundred GP or less. As for things like sets of armor, Rune was also only worth about 60k more back then than it is now. 190k down to about 130k. Let's talk about some really shocking numbers though. Dragon Med Helms are a pretty iconic item. Now, they're worth around 60k GP. Back in 2003, however, they went for 2 mil and up. Things like party hats went from anywhere from 3 mil to 16 mil. You'll notice the magenta or pink party hat is the most expensive. This was long before the Great RuneScape Classic duplication glitch that plummeted their value to become the cheapest party hat. Things like Santa hats and Halloween masks went for around 150 to 500k GP. Back in 2003, it also cost you anywhere from 4 to 10 times the price to just cast a spell. Every basic rune went from around 20 to 50 GP, whereas today most basic runes cap out at about 5 or 6. These are the most interesting data points I could find for Classic. Moving on, RuneScape 2 releases and causes the game to receive a massive boost in popularity. To account for this, places were set up in-game where specific items could be purchased. Although they existed in Classic as well as in most price guides, they didn't typically include them. Along with listing the location of where you could purchase the items, players started to create intricate maps. I discuss why these spots later disappeared in my Abandoned by RuneScape series. That specific video should be on screen now, as well as in the description. Moving on, the first updated price list we have is from 2004, and it's a little bit shocking. If you remember, U-logs were going for 2,500 just a year ago. By now they have dropped all the way down to 250 to 350 GP. Sharks also took a pretty big hit too, around 4,000 to 5,000, all the way down to less than 1k. On the other hand, the Dragon Med Helm continued to go up in price and went from anywhere from 2.25 to 2.6 mil. Manta rays were a pretty niche food item back then too, and were around 30k each. This is insane compared to today's 1k cost. It was literally 30 times the price it is today. Crystal keys were also added to the game around this time and were going for around 90 to 100k. Rune armor sets actually went up in price to around 190k to 220k average. To wrap up 2004, let's cover the prices of runes and rares and one more special item. Most runes more or less halved in price, and basic runes averaged around 5 to 15 GP each. As for rares, not much really changed, everything was generally the same price. Except for the purple party hat, which dipped over 10 million GP down to 2.5 to 3.2 mil as a result of the previously mentioned party hat duplication glitch. Finally, the dragon chain body was introduced about 6 months prior to this version of the price guide and was sitting around 20 to 25 mil. This is just so insane since it's barely worth a mil today. Not to mention, when it was originally introduced, it was worth over double what it was worth then. Skipping forward 2 years to mid-2006, RuneScape had been steadily growing and receiving more and more players every day. This little price guide had received quite a large amount of attention, and its creator decided a move to Zybez would be for the best. This allowed it to be much more easily customized, easier to view, and search for whatever item you wanted. Over these 2 years, resources really didn't change much in price, if at all. Even manta rays were still about 30k each. Things like the rune armor and rune set stabilized back down to 175 to 200k GP. The obsidian cape, released a little under a year ago at this point in time, was sitting at 250k, which is surprisingly a lot less than today's almost 1 million GP price tag. Items like the Abyssal Whip, which were also introduced about a year and a half prior, were sitting at around 2 to 3 million GP. For those interested, when it was first introduced, it was about 20 mil, and in just a year and a half dropped all the way down to just 2 or 3. In general, everything stayed at the same price except for newly introduced items that were very volatile. The only exception to this rule were once again rare items. Party hat shot up to anywhere between 78 mil to 230 mil. The Santa hat was at 7.5 mil, and Halloween masks were between 7 to 15 mil. This, besides the rare items and the very expensive dragon items, is pretty accurate of what today's market looks like. Although the modern market price points are pulled from Old School RuneScape rather than RuneScape 3, it's still fairly similar between the two games. This is really where the history before the Grand Exchange ends. Things like the Dragon Chain Body and Whip continued to drop, while rares went up in value and common resources remained the same as always. It's just crazy to me that items we now consider newbie or common were once worth millions of GP. Make sure to drop a like and leave your thoughts about all this down below.